We're beginning Chapter 9, The Secret History, Atta in Flight School. The story of Mohomed Atta's stay in the U.S. has not yet begun to be told, but remains shrouded, deliberately hidden, part of this country's secret history. That history, in other words, in which lone gunmen play no role. Nowhere is this more visible than in the official story about Mohomed Atta at American flight schools, which is an exceedingly simple one. He went to Huffman Aviation for 6 months, period. Following that experience, the FBI says his only additional training was in-flight simulators, where he supposedly got the feel of piloting an airliner. But the real history of Atta as a student pilot at U.S. flight schools is an altogether more elaborate tale than that. For example, Atta's first flight school in the U.S. has never been named. Its identity remains a mystery. We're not sure why, but it does. After that, he attended Huffman Aviation in Venice, Jones Aviation in Sarasota next, then Huffman Aviation again. After leaving Huffman for the second time, Atta and Marwan trained during January and February of 2001 at Professional Aviation at the Charlotte County Airport. When that school went suddenly and mysteriously bankrupt at the end of February 2001, Atta and Marwan returned to Huffman Aviation for the third time. We discovered where Atta went after leaving Venice and Huffman at the end of December 2000 when we learned of a post-9/11 investigation into suspected espionage by students at Professional Aviation, which left a paper trail subsequently uncovered by reporters. That's the big picture. Here's the big question. Was Atta actually undergoing flight training at all the flight schools he attended? Whether Atta was actually a student pilot during all of the time he spent at the just-mentioned flight schools is still unanswered. But the reason for its importance is because there is another plausible explanation for how Atta spent his time in flight school. Instead of pilot training, Atta's status as foreign flight student may have merely been a good legend or cover story that allowed him to move freely around the United States while engaged in activities not limited to coordinating and readying the 9/11 attack. Whatever he was up to while attending U.S. flight schools, learning to fly could not have been his only or maybe even chief motivation, because Mohomed Atta was already a licensed pilot when he arrived in the U.S. Amanda Keller told us, an experienced licensed pilot. One day while Atta was rummaging through his flight bag, the same bag important enough to warrant its own room in Key West, Amanda got a look inside. Something the FBI was most interested in was his pilot bag, she told us. They asked about it a lot. He kept it locked and they wanted to know whether I had ever seen anything in it. I told them yes. One day he opened it briefly, and there were a lot of papers in it. There was a blue logbook in a different language. Mohomed was fluent in almost any language you can think of, she continued, and he had a kind of day timer in there. He had a kind of day timer in there, too, and a folder with all these different IDs in it. And that's when I saw one because it fell out. A little blue and white thing the size of a driver's license. It had his picture on it, and it looked like a mugshot or a prison shot, and it didn't look like him, and I asked, "Who is this?" And he said, "That's me." He told me it had been taken back when he was in some kind of militia type deal, like a military type deal, he said. He compared it to our military, only they teach you different tactics. He didn't elaborate. He didn't say where it was from either, she said, but the writing looked like a cross between Hebrew and Arabic. those little frilly lines. He told me he spoke Hebrew. I said bullshit, so he started speaking it, and I guess he did. We longed for a fuller explanation of the militia-type deal to which Mohomed Atta belonged, and wished he had dropped the ID in front of an eyewitness who might have recognized the issuing organization. Still, this is crucial information. What Amanda said next shed even more light. She told me that he went to different countries and studied. He had pilot's licenses from several different countries, but all the pictures looked different. All the names were different. He had a license to fly from just about every country he had been to. He went to pilot school in all these countries. He said no matter where he decided to live, he could always fly, she said, because he said it was his path. He had always wanted to be a pilot. I asked him, and he told me his last name was spelled different in different languages, but he always kept the first name Mohammed. There was one pilot's license from France, one from Germany. He also had one in the homeland, he called it, she said. Homeland is a word we've all grown used to since 9/11, but it was strange to hear Atta use it too. What Mohomed Atta told Amanda Keller about himself was what a spy tells a civilian. A cover story, a legend. He probably had a number of them. He said his father was a commercial jet pilot from France, said Amanda. His mom was from the homeland. He said they ran from there, moved to France, and that he went to Lebanese private schools. I didn't know what to think, she said. I don't know what countries connect to what countries. If you were to show me a globe, I could pick out the US and Canada, but not much more. I never paid any attention. That Amanda believed his story wasn't too surprising. Most of us accept other people at more or less face value. Amanda wasn't trained to spot spies, and she clearly wasn't a geography major. And there's another thing worth mentioning. Keller wasn't all that interested in Mohomed Atta. While she knew him, she told us candidly, he was a very brief way station on her personal journey. Her time with him had been a matter of convenience. If he hadn't become instantly infamous after the 9/11 attack, Amanda told us, she would probably have never thought about him again. The official story of Mohomed Atta's progression through American flight schools in the run-up of September 11th attack begins when he and Marwan al-Shehi arrived at the squat beige hangar of the Airman School in Oklahoma early in July of 2000 and asked to take a look around. Although Venice would receive most of the media spotlight, 2 days after the attack, a school official in Oklahoma confirmed that Atta and al-Shehi had first visited their school, the Airman Flight School, staying overnight at the school's dormitory in the nearby Sooner Inn before deciding to train at another facility. The school's admissions director told reporters she gave them her standard half-hour tour. The 6 flight simulators, the classrooms, the airfield. The 2 men then thanked her and left. They did a school visit in July of 2000, but went elsewhere for whatever reason. After this brief mention of the terrorists' visit, media interest in the Oklahoma Flight School quickly waned. This is strange because, just like Huffman Aviation, the Airman Flight School in Norman, Olka, was something of a magnet for associates of Osama bin Laden, the most famous of the terrorists who have been identified as having trained there in Zacarias Moussaoui, the French national and so-called 20th hijacker accused of conspiracy in September 11th terror attacks, who spent 3 months there during 2001. Yet the Oklahoma school's involvement with Al-Qaeda terrorists begins much earlier than that. After the trial of 4 men charged with the 1998 bombing of the American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, prosecutors introduced evidence that an Orlando, Florida cab driver named Ihab Ali, bin Laden's personal pilot, trained at Airman Flight School in the early 90s. Ali was indicted for refusing to answer questions about his ties to the bin Laden organization, including his pilot training in Oklahoma, according to court papers. There is something strange about the FBI's relationship with Airman Flight School. It provides a striking example of what looks like willful failure, despite specific warnings, to detect the terror threat before it happened. Since the FBI was aware that a number of suspected terrorists had attended the Oklahoma facility, a reasonable assumption would be that agents must have taken extra special interest in the school and especially its Arab students. Nothing could be further from the truth. 2 agents were sent to Mosawai's Airman Flight School in Oklahoma to investigate, said a September 25, 2002 story in the New York Daily News, including one who had been sent to the same school 2 years earlier to check on someone identified as Osama bin Laden's personal pilot. The agent said he had forgotten about the connection. 2 weeks before the 9/11 attack, an FBI agent arrived at Airman Flight School to investigate Mosawai. The same agent had been to the school 2 years earlier on a case involving Osama bin Laden's personal pilot, but claims to have forgotten when visiting the school the second time. Does this pass the smell test? If your answer is no, it does not. Joining the growing ranks of those who doubt the government's explanation for the 9/11 disaster, it is arguably the biggest dropped ball in American investigative history. Even the top Republican on the Senate Intelligence Committee felt the stirrings of something otherworldly going on, calling for hearings to look into whether U.S. intelligence missed warnings that could have prevented the attacks. Republican of Alabama Senator Richard Shelby told reporters, "You go back and see what was the evidence that maybe we missed. Maybe they didn't miss it. Maybe they didn't go after it. This is shocking stuff." Shelby appears to be suggesting deliberate malfeasance. During the emotional chaos and the aftermath of the attack, no one noticed that the Airman Flight School's director gave a description of the so-called 20th hijacker, which used the same verbiage Huffman Aviation's Rudy Deckers used when speaking to reporters about Mohomed Atta. "He was pretty bad in the plane. He was just difficult to teach," she told reporters. "Every conversation with him was difficult. He was demanding and arrogant. Not a nice guy." Both Deckers and his Oklahoma counterpart stressed that their terrorist student had a bad attitude. Their message seemed to be terrorists are not nice people. No one questioned why these 2 particular flight schools had done such land office business with Osama bin Laden's henchmen. Whatever their reservations about Oklahoma, Florida would offer an inviting welcome and prove to be a congenial place for terrorists to learn to fly. And Atta and al-Shehi signed up for flight training at Huffman Aviation in Venice in early July. But between their visit in Oklahoma and when they showed up in Venice 3 weeks later is a span of time that is a real mystery. That's because the flight school Mohomed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi first attended in the United States has not been named. It is unknown. It is a mystery flight school. The name of the first school Atta attended would seem to be one of the first facts uncovered in the 9/11 investigation, but it hasn't been. Although the FBI said Huffman Aviation was the first flight school Atta attended, the owner of Huffman Aviation, Rudy Deckers, denied it. He declaimed responsibility for the terrorists having been allowed into the United States, passing any blame onto the flight school the terrorists first attended. It was this school, Decker said, which held responsibility for Atta's INS paperwork and visa, not his. On the morning after the disaster, anchor Jane Clayson of the CBS Morning News asked Deckers, how was it that they, Atta and Marwan, could gain access and admittance to your school? Well, they didn't came through our paperwork, Deckers replied. Like if they were calling from Europe and we know 2 months ahead and we know they are showing up, as I say, they came from another flight school out of Florida. Probably the flight school did all the INS paperwork with them in their country. Another flight school out of Florida. He was equally vague later that day on ABC's Good Morning America, except he had changed the location of the unnamed first school. Correspondent Jim Mora asked Deckers, now, how did they get to you? Did they apply to the school? Did they just show up? No, they just walked up into the front door, Deckers replied. Apparently they were flying at another school. I've heard Tampa. I can't confirm that. This is a really obscure flight school. It has no name. It's located somewhere out of Florida near Tampa. Strangely, Decker's reference to Atta's first flight school, attended before he came to Huffman Aviation, went completely unremarked upon in national media. Deckers didn't just mention the mystery flight school once or twice, he did it numerous times. The two men were clearly from the Middle East, he quoted as saying in the September 13th New York Times. They complained that they had begun instruction elsewhere, but didn't like the school. Did the New York Times ask Deckers where elsewhere had been? They did not. The Washington Post reported a similar story on September 19th, quoting Deckers saying Atta and al-Shehi showed up complaining about the experience at another school. Another school elsewhere? Did the Post ask for the name of the flight school located elsewhere? They did not. Or if they did, they did not let us in on it. They did not let us in on it. The Washington Post, like the New York Times, forgot to ask, making this omission seem even more sinister than the Post's own headline. Hijacked suspects tried many flight schools, promising at a bare minimum a story containing a list of the flight schools tried. When two of the largest and most respected newspapers in America are both guilty of an omission this glaring, what other conclusion is there than that a massive cover-up is in progress? Even in his sworn testimony before the House Judiciary Committee on March 19, 2002, Deckers is vague about the earlier flight school attended by Atta and al-Shehi. This time he places it up north. They had stated they were unhappy with a flying school they attended up north, Deckers told the committee. None of the members of Congress in attendance asked about this first flight school. It's as if the Warren Commission had said Lee Harvey Oswald lived someplace before moving to Dallas and left it at that. What remains unclear is how Atta and al-Shehi qualified for flight instruction in the first place. As foreigners, while studying at Huffman Aviation, the men would have been required to obtain student visas. Deckers said the school helps students obtain the visas. We send them the paperwork and they go to their embassies. Richard Niren, a British classmate of Atta and Marwan, told a reporter that it's not easy to get a student visa, even with the help of the school. He said he had to prove bank statements to show he had money to cover his lessons and living expenses and a house mortgage, and to prove he would return to the United Kingdom. His student visa was rejected the first time he applied because he hadn't submitted enough information, he said. Yet Mohomed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi, who Deckers identified as being from Afghanistan, waltzed right in. Imagine that. From July through December, they were at Huffman Aviation, with a brief 3-week stint at nearby Jones Aviation in Sarasota. Then, in December, the terrorist duo moved 40 miles south to professional aviation at the Charlotte County Airport, where they underwent flying training the FBI had chosen not to tell us about. Atta's sojourn in Charlotte County is not the official story, which is really strange, because it is the FBI itself which is the source of this knowledge. In a memo from the Bureau to the INS introduced in court during the deposition hearing of a Tunisian a Tunisian student suspected of espionage. If they had known we would be paying attention, they'd have probably used a military tribunal. Professional aviation at the Charlotte County Airport catered to a student body consisting mainly of foreign nationals from the small Mediterranean country of Tunisia, considered a moderate Arab state. There were so many Tunisians at the school that it made the news well before the 9/11 attack. From the steady hand on the throttle to the aviator sunglasses, Mariam Ezahi looked every bit like the experienced pilot she hopes to be back in her native country of Tunisia, reported the Charlotte Sun-Herald in a feature story. Mariam's goal is to become a commercial pilot like her late father, who flew jets for Tunisair, the country's national airline. Alas, Mariam would get stiffed by the owners of the school, so would dozens of other Tunisian students left stranded by the bankrupting of a flight school there. Local news was filled with accounts of the scandal at the Charlotte airport. Some foreign students had lost their life savings. Amid a flurry of media attention, students picketed the company's offices and staged a sit-in. Television news crews from Charlotte County and Fort Myers broadcast their plight. The students claimed that they had paid more than $170,000 for flight training and received virtually nothing. With the promise of quicker, cheaper training, Florida flight schools recruited students from the Arab nation, reported the Charlotte Sun-Herald in March 2001. But what a group of young Tunisians ended up with an education in far more than flying. Many of them lost tens of thousands of dollars each when the school they paid to attend professional aviation in Punta Gorda closed. Many of the students had given its owner, David Byers, thousands of dollars in advance to cover training and housing costs, and the papers reported. Now their money was gone. Students protested for days outside professional aviation's offices, holding signs with messages reading, "Where's our money? What about our future?" The story of Zohir Zidiri, a Tunisian student, was typical, said the paper. He left his wife and job in Tunisia to acquire his pilot's license in Charlotte County in the hope of someday flying commercially. but he received little instruction for the amount of money he paid. I have built so many dreams on this endeavor, Zediri said. I have only had 3.5 hours of flight training and a headset to show for the $7,000 I paid. He, Byers, thinks because I am not from this country, I don't know the law. Former student Fear Samai told reporters, but I know what fraud means. I paid $17,000, said another Tunisian student. They stole it from me. I lost my future. The story of stranded and bilked Arab student pilots received extensive local coverage. But in the days after the 9/11 attack, when national reporters asked questions about reports of numerous foreigners training at the Charlotte County Airport, an airport official there had the presence of mind to cover it up. I don't think either school has international students, said airport director Cindy Anderson. If the stakes are high enough and the press docile enough, you can get away with almost anything in 21st century America, Cindy Anderson did. While Mohomed Atta and his brand of terrorists were making themselves at home in Florida, some of their American hosts were preying on the food in Arab flight schools, turning up in large numbers, joining the ranks of German and Dutch flight trainees. Praying over the food, I guess. When professional aviation went bankrupt, a number of Arab student pilots there, including many of dozens of Tunisian students who had paid as much as $25,000 up front for flight training, moved up the road to begin attending flight school in Venice. Mohomed Atta was one of them. It marked the third occasion he and Marwan returned to Venice. The FBI says they were only there once. So Amanda Keller's testimony that Atta was living for 2 months in Northport, close to the Charlotte County Airport, before moving into the Sandpiper Apartments across from the Venice Airport in early March with her, dovetails perfectly with these accounts of Arab students moving up to Venice in March 2001 after professional aviation ceased operations. In the flush of full disclosure, Sheriff Clement had told reporters that Atta had been in flight training at the Charlotte County Airport. Though news accounts noted the flight schools denied he had been there, the connection had been made, and Atta and Al-Shehi, the Sun Herald reported, often flew to the Charlotte County Airport where professional aviation was located, and authorities have linked some of the emails sent by the two hijackers to a professional aviation computer. In an attempt to pin the blame for the bankruptcy on the students' shoulders, a mechanic at the defunct school told reporters that one student was involved in an incident at a local dance club that Amanda told us she and Atta had frequented together. One of the students damaged a school car in the parking lot of Area 51, the mechanic said. News accounts also stated what is likely a direct reference to Atta's eviction from the immense, well-furnished house which Amanda said he was living in when she met him. Students also claimed they have received an eviction notice at one of the homes where they resided in Deep Creek, reported the Sun Herald. 3 of the Tunisian students who had attended professional aviation were taken into custody during the week after the attack. One of them was 21-year-old Mariam Bedoui. Bedoui had been one of the Tunisians who moved to Venice when professional aviation went under. There, she studied at Dutch national Arne Kutrof's Florida Flight Training Center, a block from Huffman Aviation. During a deportation hearing in Bradenton, Florida, 3 months after the attack, Bedoui told the judge that she was friends with one of Atta's roommates, but she denied knowing Atta and denied as well any involvement or knowledge of the 9/11 plot. However, the FBI noted in a letter to the immigration judge about the case that Bedoui had attended flight schools in Punta Gorda and Venice, Florida. At the same time, the hijackers Atta and Marwan al-Shehi trained at a nearby flight school inadvertently, revealing information indicated they have knowingly fabricated their own chronology of Atta's time in the U.S., presenting evidence for why Bedoui should be deported. The FBI's letters stated Bedoui had attended Florida Flight Training Center in Venice at the same time. The Atta and al-Shehi were just blocks away from another school, but Mariam Bedoui didn't enter the U.S. until 2001, and according to the FBI's chronology, Atta and al-Shehi were at Huffman only from July to December 2000. So according to the FBI's own reckoning, Atta was in Venice months after they said he left for good. The Sun-Herald reporter noted the contradiction and went to federal authorities seeking answers to give their readers. FBI spokeswoman Sarah Oakes declined to comment Friday about the discrepancy, reported the paper. Why had the FBI shown their hand? Probably because they didn't think anyone would catch the slip, and because they must have been a little anxious about Bedoui, who, during a solo flight 2 weeks before the attack, made an unauthorized nightmare landing at a Lockheed Martin airstrip near Orlando. The site is headquarters for Lockheed Martin's Missiles and Fire Control Division, which develops advanced combat missile, rocket, and space systems, all of which are deemed somewhat sensitive to national security. Bedoui told the judge she had run out of fuel and landed rather than risking crashing. "I was out of fuel," Bedoui said. "If I don't land, I crash." Since the facility was closed, Bedoui said she spent the night there in her plane. An immigration judge ordered her to return to Tunisia. In ordinary times, the judge told Bedoui, that may not be a big thing, but these are not ordinary times. Federal authorities never made public any details of the arrests of the three Tunisians. The matter was cloaked in such secrecy that two federal agencies were fighting over who was in charge. Each pointed the finger at the other. FBI spokeswoman Sarah Oakes in Tampa said the FBI had only assisted the INS in making the arrests. They were not arrested on FBI violations, Oates said. But in Miami, regional INS spokesman Rodney Germain told reporters, "We are assisting the FBI because of the sensitivity of the investigation and the importance of the information. We cannot release any information." In the end, the big losers were the flight school students, who were out of large sums of money. Some of the students filed a criminal complaint against the company with the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. After trying to question professional aviation's owner David Byers about flight time and a refund of their money, "We were supposed to meet David this morning at 8 a.m., but he did not show up. He told us not to worry, that he wasn't going out of business," Yusuf Abdelkrim told reporters. Byers did not return phone calls or request to answer the door at his Port Charlotte home. Maybe that was because the situation involving the Tunisian students was not the only problem Byers faced. David is past due on the rent at the Charlotte County Airport for January, February, March, and April. So we are in litigation on that matter, said Fred Watts, Charlotte County Airport Executive Director. Was this just a case of hardworking small businessmen who couldn't make it work? Not to the local paper, it wasn't. They smelled fraud. The records imply that Byers simply did not pay his bills or taxes. Among other creditors are phone companies such as Sprint, MCI, WorldCom, and Quest Communications, utilities such as Florida Power and Light, Charlotte County Utilities, and the Charlotte Harbor Water Association, and cable company Comcast, Florida's Department of Revenue and Department of Labor, as well as the International Revenue Service. Among the rest of the 116 people and businesses who have claims against professional services, such as gas companies, exterminators, air conditioner repairmen, body shops and aviation companies such as National Giant Raytheon and Punta Gorda's ModWorks. David Byers, owner of Professional Aviation, slipped out the back door with a lot of foreign students' money. In a later chapter, we will see an Orlando flight school do the exact same thing. Although on the surface, the two flight schools are not in any way related. We believe both will be shown to have been covertly associated with each other and to Huffman Aviation in Venice as well. There are strong similarities between Professional Aviation in Charlotte County and Huffman Aviation in Venice, each supposedly a freestanding business in competition with each other. Professional Aviation had been going bankrupt at exactly the same time that Huffman Aviation's Rudy Deckers was generating embarrassing coverage in the local press for his inability to pay his rent at the Venice airport. Numerous witnesses at the Charlotte County Airport had confirmed reports that Mohomed Atta was there during a time when the FBI said he was somewhere else. What was going on? Why didn't the FBI just quietly change their chronology to accommodate the facts? Why were they ignoring an elephant in the living room? What were they trying to hide? We discovered that they weren't trying to hide an elephant. That would be silly. They were trying to hide an ark. Okay, chapter 23. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do chapter 23 tomorrow. I'm kind of tired today.